Okay, everybody, here we are. It's another Saturday, and this was a big one that I'd been building up to. And I know some of you folks are excited about it, and some of you folks are probably like, whatever. But either way, we're gonna hit it hard. There's a lot to go over. There's a lot of history, and there's a lot of misconceptions, but there's also a lot of the topic is something that people who are involved in it tend to make it worse for themselves. And you'll find out why as we go along here because there's so many people involved and not everybody understands it and things like that. Um, so what are we doing? It is the Saturday Spiritualist, of course. And tonight's episode, we're going to be digging into the ins and outs of left hand path philosophy. This is where I'm at on a spiritual level, I guess. I'm not super spiritual, I guess. I mean, I kind of felt like I was for a few years, and now I'm just kind of philosophical, I guess. And this is a good zone to be in if you're less into the like really spiritual side of it and more into a philosophy that makes sense. And that's my deal. That's more what I'm at right now. So, um, why is it called left hand path? Um, the only people that call it that are the people on that side, and they have left hand and right hand path. They have two designators. People who are involved in what we consider right hand path don't call it that. They don't think about that. They don't think about that kind of stuff. But there's a reason why we have this left and right dualism kind of thing. So let's start with a little bit of history. Now, overall things, left hand philosophy has kind of been around for a long time. It's basically a catch all for almost any alternative to the mainstream religions, but also in a way that doesn't involve personally worshiping an actual uh, deity of some kind. That's the big thing about left hand folks. If you're actually there, you don't, you can kind of be considered atheist to a point, I suppose. I don't consider myself an atheist, but at the same time, I don't believe in following a deity or a divine force or anything like that. And that's the primary driver for left hand philosophy. You don't follow things. Um, we consider the big religions like Christianity and Judaism and Islam and a lot of those as right hand because right hand path is called that for us because specifically it was pulled from biblical verses because initially the people who set the kind of the left hand path stuff up set it up in a way where they were trying to irritate the other side, quote unquote. It was meant to be kind of antagonistic to attract people of that mindset. Um, and so they looked into the religious parts to see what they could use to argue against that. And so they call right hand path because it's seated at the right hand of God, which is something that you find in biblical literature. If you know the verses and stuff and you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, that's okay. I'm not going to get too much into that because I don't want this to become a super religious episode. I want it to be philosophical. I want it to be, introspective and help people learn some things. And so traditionally in early Judaism and early Christianity, um, because of the verses of being at the right hand of God, that meant that right was good, and conversely, left was bad. So left-handed people were bad. Um, when the Antichrist was supposed to come along in Revelations, he was supposed to be deaf in his right ear because right was the traditional side of good, which is interesting because I'm slowly going deaf in my right ear, but don't read too much into that. Um, and different things like that, and like left brain, right brain kind of stuff too. Like they're like, um, there's a lot of that goes into that, and so it was thought up by the people who eventually came up with the name left hand path. Whereas right hand is like I said, more standard religion where you worship something, you follow something, you're a servant of something, whether or not you feel like you're actually a servant, or just like, hey, you know what, I believe that this thing is greater than me, and I follow that. Left-hand people instead feel that you should be equals. They instead feel that everybody should be on the same level, and that if you try to undermine that, then you should be pushed out of the equation. And that doesn't mean violent. That doesn't mean like go out and murder people. It just means you're not worthy of being noticed. Like you're beneath notice, and that you don't really matter in the whole scheme of things. A true left-hand path person, instead of believing in deities, they believe in concepts. And they sometimes give these concept names, like the Church of Satan. Of course, I'm going to get to their history in a minute. They don't actually believe in a Satan figure. They're basically atheist, believe it or not. And I'm going to go into the whys about that. They see the Satan archetype as a concept to follow in different ways. And I'm not a part of them. I've never thought about joining them because I think some of that's too showy. I think some of that's a little, too much in the attempt to irritate the other side, and there's a lot of that. And the derivative of that, which is the Satanic Temple, is a lot like that as well. You've probably heard a lot about them in the news over the last 10, 15 years, because they're the ones who, anytime somebody wants to put like we want to put the 10 Commandments in front of a courthouse, they'll show up and be like, oh, well, why don't you put the satanic whatever in front of the courthouse too? Because it's freedom of religion. And there's usually a big fight. And they've won several times because, it's logical. If you're going to have one, have the other. But they're real pushy about it, which is kind of why I'm not into it. I'm not into being pushy. I'm not into being bothersome with people. And I think the real core of left-hand path philosophy is more in line with what I think and less in line with the showiness and all that other kind of stuff. As much as there's so many other like big prominent people in the movement, I guess I can call it a movement, I don't know, who would disagree with me. And I'm certainly not saying that I'm absolutely right and that, my view is the best view. I'm just saying I think logically mine works the best, which is why I follow it. In that it's all about personal responsibility. And that's the biggest thing. It's personal responsibility. Whereas a lot of times with religion, instead of personally being responsible for things, a lot of times you instead, let's just pray it away. Let's just cast all your cares on Jesus or on God or on whoever, and then we don't got to worry about it anymore. That's kind of abdicating your responsibility on things. It's taking things that you should kind of be working on yourself and making them somebody else's responsibility. Whether that other person is a real person or a concept or whatever, it's still taking it away from yourself. Whereas left-hand path, you instead take a look at yourself and be like, no, all of these things come from my own mind, so I have to work on all of them myself. That doesn't mean you don't ask for help. That doesn't mean you don't, talk things out with other people and, different other mental health things that are good. It just means that you should be responsible for the things in your life, good or bad. If good things happen in your life, own up to it. Be like, yeah, good things are going on. I did this and this thing happened. It was great. I did this and this thing happened. It was great. You don't got to be an ego about it and be like, yeah, I did this thing and I'm so awesome and whatever. But own up to it. Be like, yeah, you know what? Things are going good because I did these things. I feel accomplished. Whereas if things are going crappy, be like, you know what? I made mistakes. I did this, I did this, I did this. And things are kind of crappy right now. And it's my fault. But I'm working on it. And that's the key. I'm working on it. That's the difference. Instead of being like, well, I prayed about it and I feel better. Okay, but did you do anything about it? No. And that's not to knock people who believe in power of prayer and things, which we've talked about on the main show several times. But it's more, you still got to do something. You have to still dig yourself out of whatever hole you're in or whatever you did. And that's where mostly I'm coming from. So let's get some history. Most people who know about this kind of stuff know about a guy named Anton LaVey. He was the founder of the Church of Satan in 1966. And like I said, I'm going to get down to some of the salient points. His doctrines that he wrote down in a book called the Satanic Bible, which I have and I've read, and it's, it's okay. It's like 80% fluff because of who he was and because of what he was trying to accomplish. But in this, when you pare away some of that kind of stuff, the good stuff there is, well, not necessarily the good stuff, but the stuff that makes sense. The Church of Satan is based on materialism, meaning that everything that happens is here. There's no, heavenly place. There's no whatever. It's here. They rejected the existence of supernatural beings, which is, when people hear Church of Satan, they're like, well, how could they do that? They believe in Satan, don't they? Well, no, they actually don't. They use that as a prod, and I'll get to that in a minute too. They also don't believe in the body having a separate soul. They don't believe in life after death, and they don't worship Satan, but they do view the satanic character as a positive archetype representing pride and enlightenment. But Anton LaVey was also a showman. He was a carnival barker at one point in his life, at least. And he knew how to work up a crowd. He knew how to appeal to people's, to what the people wanted to hear. And so that's one of the things he did. He went out of his way to write his books and to build his religion or his spirituality and philosophy to irritate people and to annoy people and to anger people who were on the religious side, specifically the Catholics. I did just say that. That's a big point, Deadpool, in the chat room. Real Satanists don't believe that there is a Satan. They only have that name as a symbol. And it's a symbol of rebellion against the mainstream stuff. Again, Anton LaVey specifically was against Catholicism. He was against Catholics more than anything else, but he meant it against all kinds of faiths. And so he would dress up in his devil costumes and do these big things and publicly say all this stuff to irritate them even more, because he knew that they just weren't going to like anything he had to say anyway. So why not push their buttons? Now, with that being said, there are people out there who do believe that they're worshiping a real devil creature, a real Satan, and all that kind of stuff. That's getting into crazy territory. That's getting into cult territory and things like that. And I'm not in that zone. And most people who would talk about left-hand path aren't in that zone either. People who worship like an actual Satan creature don't tend to know what left-hand path is, or they've learned a few buzzwords. If you talk to them and you ask them about it, you're like, oh, what about this? What about this? They don't really know what you're talking about, which tells you. But LaVey, again, he wanted to irritate the other side, but also to kind of throw out that little nibble for people who were kind of curious, for people who were like, oh, I've been a Catholic all my life, but I haven't been feeling it. I kind of feel like these feelings are wrong, and you're kind of speaking to those feelings that I have that maybe there's something else I might be into. And so people think it's like taboo, and they think, oh, this is something dark and evil and mysterious. I want to kind of find out about it. And then they get into it and they find out, oh, you don't believe in this, you don't believe in this, you don't believe in this. Okay. And there's good points in there. He did make some good points, but a lot of it was kind of showy, and a lot of it was about, fighting back against the mainstream religions and things and whatnot, and antagonizing them so that they looked like the bad guy. And that was his thing. Now, over time, he stepped down from leadership of that, and other people took the reins and had different ideas, and different people split off and made different organizations and groups. One of those people was a guy named Michael Aquino, who's kind of he's a tough figure to get into. He's not as charismatic as LaVey was. And there's rumors that he was into things with kids and things, and it's hard to say. I don't know. I don't hold this guy to a pedestal, and I haven't looked into his personal history at all myself too much, because I'm kind of like, I don't want to get involved with that kind of thing. That's not my thing. But he splintered off and made a couple of other organizations. And the biggest organization that he made that grabbed my attention and really pulled me into this thing is a group called the Temple of Set, which it's the one time, I mean, I've thought more than once about it, but it's the one group that I've thought, you know what, maybe I'll think about joining in. But I always pull back because there's always like, there's rules, there's this and that, and I don't like rules. I hate rules. I don't like being told, like, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. I don't like that. No matter what, whether it's philosophy or religion or work or anything, I hate it. And, you know, I've held down plenty of jobs before, so I can follow the rules. I just don't like to. And I think that's fair. But, so the Temple of Set took some of those ideas of personal responsibility that the Church of Satan had kind of buried in there among all those layers, and they piled it into Egyptian philosophy, into this idea of what's called Kepher, which is pronounced with a K, but it's written Xeper, which is personal transformation, basically. That's not the exact translation. I've got it somewhere, and I should know it off the top of my head because I have several books and things by the temple. But they espoused a philosophy of continuous personal change, where you're never done growing, which is true. If you feel like you're done growing, then you already kind of strayed. You already don't know. You're already done, and you've kind of closed yourself off. You're closed-minded. Even if you're like 89 years old or older, there's still things you don't know yet, or things you can do yet, depending on where your physicality is at, where your mental faculties are at. You can always continue to grow and improve yourself. And so that's the core of their philosophy. And instead of choosing Satan as their central figure, their force of nature, whatever, their archetype, they instead chose the Egyptian god Set. Because he was a troublemaker over there. He dismembered his brother, that kind of thing. There's a lot more to it, of course. If you want to get into Egyptian history, it's really fascinating, especially the oldest stuff. Like, it changed over time, but the oldest Egyptian things are really, really interesting. And they leaned a lot more heavily on less on the showmanship and more on the work on yourself part. And even if you're a member, most of the time when they say, hey, you got to do this stuff, they tell you have to do it by yourself. They do say, hey, you know what, if you know other people who are also of the same mindset, you can get together and you can do group ritual stuff and whatever. But you should always do, if you're working on you, work on you. Don't expect other people to work on you for you. Don't, drag people into stuff that you need to work on. And so I was really interested, and there's a lot more to it than just that. But again, there's different things, like they have like levels and grades and things like that. And, I like I said, I don't like following rules. But the core of it is, instead of choosing a force or a being or a divinity that may or may not exist, and if it exists, may not really even acknowledge you or care about you at all, instead of doing that and just hoping for the best, you instead look at yourself and be like, hey, what can I do to fulfill my own spirituality? What can I do to be spiritually fulfilled? And there's a lot more room in there for things we've talked about on the show before. There's a lot more room for some ritual stuff. There's room for some of the Wicca stuff and different things, and all those have really good points to it. But you don't need to do any of that to follow left-hand path philosophy. And when I say like it's formal, like left-hand path, like it's a big deal, but it's really not. It's really boiling it all down to taking care of your problems, of course, asking for help if you need it, but making sure you take charge of yourself and do what you can to control your life without having to say, oh, I just prayed it. I just prayed it away. It's done now. It's good. I feel better. If you do feel better doing that, okay, that's cool. I'm not going to yell at you for it if that's what works for you. But for me, and for many other people, there's a lot more to it than that. And I can't see whether something like that exists or not, whether there's something off in a different plane of reality or whatever, watching me every move and judging me or whatever. I can't see that as being something I can rely on. I don't see that as something that's helpful in my day to day. And that's basically it. Yeah, it's taking care of yourself first and foremost. But it's also, and here's the tricky part, because it sounds like there's a little bit of selfishness in there, and there might be a little bit, but the other thing is, everyone is on their own spiritual level, and they're all responsible for their own selves. And in order to be responsible for yourself, you can't interfere with other people's personal responsibility. You can't go out and murder somebody, because that's putting a stop to their spiritual growth. That's super selfish of you. You can't go out and just steal stuff from people because they're working on themselves. You didn't earn that. There's a lot of common sense stuff that overlaps. So as much as it can seem like it's kind of selfish, it's also an acknowledgement that everyone else is doing what you're doing in their own way, and you're not supposed to interfere with that. You can't just go out and mess with somebody else's personal journey or personal change or responsibility. If they ask you for help, that's different. It's just like you asking for help, being like, you know what, I can't do this by myself. I need a hand. Because sometimes you do. I have a bad back. My back is very poor. I'm supposed to wear a brace anytime I do anything heavy, and I can't find it right now, so I'm in a lot of trouble. But big, heavy things that are beyond my ability, I have to ask for help. I can't do it. I mean, that's a physical thing, but mental things count as well. And you have to remember that other people have the same thing going on with them. You're not supposed to interfere with their working on themselves, unless, of course, they ask you. Now, if you see somebody struggling with something, like if somebody's struggling with an addiction or they're struggling with a relationship or whatever, nothing says you can't approach them and be like, hey, can I help? But you also can't barge in and be like, I know what you should need to do. You need to do this, and you need to do this, and you need to do this. Because that's, again, allowing your thought processes to invade their personal space. That's you barging in and messing with their personal responsibility without being asked. You can't do that. If they ask you, that's shared responsibility. Now, that doesn't mean that if somebody asks you to do something that's basically impossible, that you can just go along with it and just be like, yeah, sure, okay, I'll help. Because you're just, they're not going to learn anything from that because you're just helping them, but not. You know what I mean? If there's something that they want you to do that maybe interfere with a third person's responsibility or whatever, you be like, no, I can't do that. I can't come between each individual person and mess with all that. I'm responsible for me. You're responsible for you. We can both help each other and share some responsibility here and there, but ultimately, this is mine, that's yours, that's theirs. And that's what it is. And there is a lot of, yeah, it's just like that about teaching someone to fish versus just giving them food. We have a lot of people that stand on street corners here in my town, and some of them may legitimately need help, and that's fine. But the more you give out to people, the tendency is the less likely they are to try to go out and do things themselves to fix their situation. And everybody's situation is different. Some people, that's all they can do. Some people are at such a rock bottom that they can't do anything else but say, you know what, please give me some food. Help me. I can't do anything else. Okay. But most of us are able-bodied enough or can do something. Even with my bad back, if I had to go and get a job today, I wouldn't like it, but I could find something that I could do. I could do something. And so and like I said, there is, because there's a little bit of that kind of like ego involved with that sometimes, that you get a lot of people who might say they're in left-hand path stuff who kind of fall victim to that a little bit too. Like, I'm involved with a couple of Facebook groups, just discussion groups, that talk about left-hand path stuff, and there's always like a bunch of people. They're like, oh yeah, I did this super prayer to Asmodean and this and that, and it's going so great. And I'm kind of like, okay, we'll see. I mean, if you believe things are going to be better for you, okay, that's fine. It's your belief in it that makes the difference. But are you really helping yourself, or are you believing that some dark entity is helping you along? And I've done different rituals where I've called on forces, or I've called on archetypes or characters, basically, and said, hey, this is what it is, almost like a negotiation. But I keep it in my mind that, hey, this is play acting to convince my brain that things are going to move in a direction that I want them to, because that's what it is. That's ritual behavior. We talked about ritual behavior a couple of shows ago, and it's all about tricking the brain into thinking slightly differently. And so I guess the bottom line of it really is that if you're going to get into it, you have to know it's not going to be a particularly easy way to go. It's a lot easier to do what a lot of the mainstream religious people do and just pray about it. Yeah, I prayed about it. I feel better. I'm done. I went to confession. I confessioned, and I'm better. Okay. I mean, if that really truly helps you, great. I'm not going to say anything bad about that, but it wouldn't work for me. It wouldn't work for me because it's just like pushing it aside. The problem is still there, unaddressed, because I don't see a separate entity or being or force reaching down and like directly there, I'm helping with your problem. And that's another thing too. It's universalism is kind of like that in a way, where you're more like everybody's part of the same consciousness, and everybody needs to share, responsibility and things. And it's not easy. I'm not going to say that you can just be like, okay, well, whatever, take charge, because you're going to have plenty of bad days. Like, you're going to get stressed, people still get depressed, all that kind of thing. It's not like it's a band-aid that's going to be like the cure-all for all of it. And I'm not saying, as usual, I'm not saying that I'm absolutely correct, or that I'm like, this is the way that all of you should do it. I think it's a good way. I think it worked for me. I think I've become probably a better overall person after working this stuff out in my mind than I may have otherwise. I struggled a lot when I was a lot younger with religious stuff, because when I was a teen, I was still going to church at the time, and I did a lot of praying. Like, I did an awful lot. And people will tell me, people that I respect and people that I like hanging out with, a lot, people that I trust will tell me, oh yeah, I prayed about it, and God spoke to me and told me it's all going to be okay. And that never once happened to me in any way. Never on a feeling, like I didn't like feel any sort of extra, like, oh, there's some peaceful thing all of a sudden. I feel so much better. Never on a literal sense. Nobody whispered in my ear, nothing like that. I never experienced that. And that's not to say that it does not happen for people. Again, I don't know. Just because it didn't happen for me doesn't mean it won't happen for you or for you or for you or for whoever. But it didn't happen for me, and that caused me a lot of like mental pain, really, when I was younger, because I'd grown up being told, you do this, you do this, you do this, and this is how you improve your life, and it didn't work. Like, it just, I felt worse. Nothing ever got better. The only time things got better is when I had situations that I put myself through that were bad situations, and then I had to look at that and be like, you know what? Somebody should have done something there, whether it was another person like me, or an adult, or some other outside force should have done something to tell me, hey, what are you doing? This is wrong. This is bad. You can't do this. Somebody should have done something. And because they didn't, it told me that I had to do it myself. And from then on, it was many, many, many years of me working on myself and trying to take responsibility for things that I do, which also can lead to some mental problems. Like, sometimes you look and you're like, man, I've done all this stuff. I'm such a terrible person. And it's easy to feel like that, but everybody kind of is in that same boat at some point. And just because you do a lot of bad stuff, it doesn't make you a bad person. Sometimes it does, depending on what you do. Like, if you're out there doing like bad things to kids, then you're kind of a bad person. And I don't feel bad saying that. So you turn yourself in, please. But like, other than that, there's a lot of room for improvement. There's a lot of room to change how you feel about things. And sometimes you have to just bite down and take the consequences. Consequences are super important. Sometimes if you've done something super illegal, you got to go to jail. You got to. That's how it is. If you've hurt somebody really bad out of spite, you got to own up to it. You're going to be like, yeah, you know what? I'm sorry. Whether you mean it or not, okay, whatever. But you got to try to mend things with them, or you got to try to do something so that you don't hurt them further after that, because you've interfered with their path. You know, it all goes back to that. Don't mess with other people in a way that it's not really golden rule-esque so much, because, you know, sometimes people will come in out of their way to interfere with you, and they'll keep going after you. Like, if somebody's looking to physically attack you on things, then you got to defend yourself. You should defend yourself. I'm not saying you should like murder somebody because they're trying to hurt you, but you should defend yourself to the best of your ability, because you can't let people just get away with that kind of stuff. If somebody's just hurling insults, whatever, who cares? You can say what you want. It's only hurts if I believe it. And if I don't believe it, then I don't care. You can say I'm dumb. You can say I'm a big idiot. You can say whatever. But if I don't believe it, what do I care? What do I care? You're just shouting at nothing. You know, what does it matter? So I feel like I've been talking a lot longer. Like, the video says it's only been like 34 minutes and some seconds, but I feel like it's been a lot longer. And I expected this video to be like hour long, like the Jedi one, which is still a pretty good episode. If you haven't watched it yet, go back and watch that, because that ended up getting into a lot of good discussion, which is weird considering what we were talking about. But and this kind of ties into that a little bit, because that Jediism is probably pretty close to left-hand path stuff, sort of, as well. It's about taking personal responsibility, and, you know, but that's more about also service to other people and things, and sometimes that can get a little out of hand. Like I said, these days, sometimes, because people are on edge about different things and whatnot, you can try to help somebody, and they can take that like really badly. If you try to help somebody that hasn't asked for your help, that can lead to a lot of problems. That can sometimes lead to them like really doing horrible things. I mean, other times it all works out, but sometimes like people will take advantage of you to the point where they'll like physically try to hurt you or kill you and things like that, which is really really terrible, unfortunately. Um, so you got to be careful. You shouldn't just go out and just, I'm going to look for somebody to help today. Great thought, not safe. Not safe. So if people ask for help, though, take a look at the situation, and if you're able to help, by all means, nothing wrong with that. It'll help them along. It'll help you along because you'll have done your deed and whatnot. It's all balance and things like that. So it seems like when people look at it, they look at it as either complicated or they look at it as, oh, this came from that Church of Satan. Oh, this came from blah, blah, blah. You're devil worshippers, blah, blah, blah. So it gets a bad rap. And again, there are people who do that kind of stuff, who say that they're under the left-hand path philosophy, and they say, oh, yeah, we worship the dark powers and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, if you worship the dark powers, whether they exist or not, you're not really left-hand path because you're working for somebody else. Which is a really bit of a twisty thing in the brain. They won't believe you, but it's true. If you worship something else and you work for something else, that's right-hand path, which does not necessarily means bad. It just means it's not what you're saying you are. You're not what you're portraying yourself as. Left hand is about the self. It is not about what's out there. It's not about what's up there. It's about the self and dealing with the self and fixing that before you fix anything else. And that's what it is. Yeah, so I guess I'm just about done. I again thought it was going to go a lot longer. Pardon me. I thought it was going to go a lot longer, but I think I said a lot in that amount of time. And yeah, but that's me. If any of you guys wonder where I'm at with everything, that's me. And that's why I don't get too much into a lot of the discussions on the main show when Rob gets into some of the biblical stuff, because while I know about it, I've read multiple editions of Bibles. I've read Quran. I've read the Torah. I've read the side thing. I think I've read the Book of Mormon once, which was kind of interesting. I read some stuff on Scientology, which is interesting to say the least, which we might get into in this show here, although I don't want to act like I'm endorsing that because it's a little, in my personal opinion, it's a little out there. But I've read all this stuff many times. I just haven't I haven't kept all of it memorized anymore because it doesn't really matter as much on a personal level to me, more on an academic way. So that's why I don't, weigh in too much on some of those discussions. But again, if you boil it all down, no devils, no demons, no dark rituals, no sacrifices, no this, no that. You want to dress up in the robes and dance around in the woods? That's fine. That's cool. If that makes you feel good, that's fine. But you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. It's about working on you, working on the self, and letting other people work on themselves. Non-interference. Okay. So that's what I got. I'm going to try to do something lighter for next week. Because I think the Jedi episode was a great episode for being a lighter episode. And I think I'm going to do something else lighter for next week. I don't have an idea just yet, because this was the heavy one. This was the real, kind of thing. But I'll get back to you guys on that. But in the meantime, what do we have for the rest of the week? Tomorrow is Sunday. As usual, there's nothing on Sunday so far. Keep an eye out, because one of these days I think Rob is going to fill that space. I don't know when. Who knows? He has his own schedule of things, a lot on his plate. Monday will be another episode of the podcast, the audio podcast, which is, of course, Let's Talk About This. My last episode was about peacocks, and I had funny stories because I know about peacocks, believe it or not. I'm peacock proficient. It's a short episode, but I think it was funny. So I don't know what's going to come up next, but it'll be there 9:30 p.m. on Spreaker. On Tuesday, it'll be another Twitch Tuesday. I'll be on my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/DMGRGN. And I will be playing a game. I don't know what I'm going to play yet, but I'll play something. And Wednesday is free and clear. And Thursday is another episode of the Uncanny Spirits Club. Things are getting interesting in the Cheap Shot Challenge over there, if you guys have been following that. And on Friday, it's another episode of This Uncanny Earth. Rob actually has the next couple weeks of This Uncanny Earth planned out already for what he wants to discuss. So that should be pretty interesting. We're actually like in a groove for that now that he's got a lot of his speaking stuff out of the way. The one he had today was his last one for quite a while. So he's like back on the study groove and everything for the shows. So lots of good stuff coming up there. Lots of interesting things. I know James has been asking for more cryptid UFO kind of things. So I'm going to have to see if we can fit more of that in there as well. Get back to more basics. But that's what we have. That's the full week. That's the Uncanny Media Network full schedule. And thank you for being here with me tonight. I hope you've learned some things. I hope I've cleared some misconceptions. And the next time you look at somebody waltzing around in a set of horns and being like, I worship Satan, you're going to be like, sure. Okay. And that's all. So I'm going to get out of here, and you folks can be well.